I came back from a 5-day rodeo run out in South Texas, sunburn still peeling off my neck, boots dusty, truck rattling like it always does, and I swear to God, I almost drove straight into a ditch, because where there used to be scrubland and mesquite, there was now a perfectly paved walking trail. Not a dirt path, not some neighbor's shortcut. I'm talking smooth black asphalt, still shiny in the afternoon sun, curving like it belonged in one of those high-end suburban brochures, the kind with smiling couples and golden retrievers. And right then, sitting there behind the wheel, engine still running, I had this one thought. They didn't just mess up, they messed with the wrong piece of land. See, that stretch of property, back corner of my ranch, ain't just empty ground. My grandfather broke his back clearing that land back in the late 50s. Man worked from sunrise to sunset with a stubborn streak that could outlast a drought. That dirt's got history in it, sweat in it. Hell, probably a little blood too, if we're being honest. And now? Now it had benches, matching benches, like soldiers standing at attention, and lanterns, actual decorative lanterns, lined up along the trail like someone thought they were designing a park, not trespassing on private property. I stepped out of the truck slow, like maybe if I blinked hard enough, it would all disappear. But nope, it was real. Fresh wood posts, neatly installed. A little gravel shoulder. Even saw tire marks from construction equipment that definitely didn't belong to me. And that's when it clicked, the HOA. Of course it was the HOA. That new subdivision they built a mile down the road. All cookie-cutter houses and HOA bylaws thicker than a Bible. Yeah, that one. I hadn't paid them much mind before. Folks move out here, want a country feel, without actually living the country life. Happens all the time. But this was different. This wasn't annoying. This was bold. I walked the length of that trail, slow, counting steps without even realizing it. And every few feet, I'd see something new. Benches, signage, even little trash bins bolted into the ground like they planned on staying forever. And then I saw it, a sign at the edge where their neighborhood met my fence line. Big, glossy, professionally printed sign. Willow Creek Community Nature Trail, private access for residents only. I just stood there staring at it, reading it twice, then a third time, and I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so unbelievably stupid. Private access? On my land. That's when the anger hit, but not the kind where you start yelling or smashing things. No, this was the quiet kind. The kind that sits heavy in your chest and starts thinking instead of reacting. Because see, I could have ended it right there. Could have fired up the old bulldozer, torn the whole thing up before dinner. Would have felt good for about 5 minutes. But then what? They'd fight it. Lawyers get involved. Turns into a mess. Nah, I wanted something better. Something that would stick. So I did what any reasonable man would do. I went home, poured myself a cup of coffee, and started making calls. First one was to a county surveyor I'd worked with years back. Guy named Rick, quiet, meticulous, the kind of man who trusts numbers more than people. I told him I needed every inch of my property line verified, GPS coordinates, markers, the whole deal. He didn't ask questions, just said he'd be out first thing in the morning. Next call was to my attorney, Harold Bennett. Old school, no nonsense, charges like a wounded bull, but worth every penny when things get serious. I told him what I found. There was a pause on the line, then he just goes, well, that's not going to end well for them. I slept better that night than you'd expect. Because once you realize you've got the law on your side, it changes the way you breathe. Next morning, Rick shows up right on time. We spent hours walking that trail, him checking coordinates, hammering in bright orange stakes, spray painting lines across the ground like he was outlining a crime scene. Which, in a way, he was. And every single foot of that trail sat squarely on my property. Not close, not overlapping, not questionable, dead center. By noon, I had documentation so clean you could frame it. That's when things started getting interesting. Because while we were out there working, people started showing up. Joggers, dog walkers, moms with strollers, all of them stepping onto that trail like it belonged to them. Some nodded at me, like we were neighbors. One guy even waved and said, "Beautiful trail, huh?" I just nodded back, didn't say a word. Let him enjoy it while he could. Because in my head, I was already calculating something else entirely. If they wanted to walk on my land, well, I figured it was only fair they paid for the privilege. And that's when the idea hit me. Not as a joke, not as some petty revenge, but as a business model. Every step they took was about to cost them. And the HOA? They had no idea what they just walked into. Now let me pause right there for a second, because if you've never dealt with an HOA before, this might sound insane, but what they did, it actually follows a pattern. Not a legal one, a psychological one. See, according to standard procedure, an HOA is supposed to operate within clearly defined property boundaries. Everything documented, approved, signed off. No guesswork, no assumptions. But here's the thing. A lot of these associations don't act like they're managing a neighborhood. They act like they're expanding one. And that's where people get into trouble. From a legal perspective, what they pulled falls into two big categories: trespass and unauthorized improvement. Trespass is obvious. They entered land they didn't own without permission. But the second one? That's where it gets interesting. Because when you build something permanent, like a paved trail, you're not just stepping over a line. You're altering someone else's property. That opens the door to damages, liability, and in some cases, forced removal. And trust me, removal of asphalt ain't cheap. But here's the part most folks miss. This is a psychological trap. HOAs rely heavily on perceived authority. They build something official-looking, they put up signs, maybe send out a newsletter, and suddenly people stop questioning ownership. It feels legitimate, so nobody asks, wait, whose land is this actually? And once the community starts using it, there's this social pressure, this assumption that it must be allowed. That's how they normalize something that was never legal to begin with. And if the real owner doesn't act fast, that's when things get messy, because over time, you start drifting into gray areas like implied access or prescriptive easements, depending on the state. The lesson here is simple. If someone builds on your land without permission, silence is the worst move you can make. Because the longer it sits, the stronger their argument becomes, not legally clean, but complicated enough to drag you into a fight you didn't ask for. And me? I wasn't about to let it get that far, not even close. So once I had the survey locked in, paperwork clean, lawyer already sharpening his teeth, I figured it was time to make my move, and not the loud, explosive kind either. No, I wanted something slow, deliberate, the kind of move that makes people realize what's happening just a second too late. That afternoon, I drove into town, picked up a heavy-duty steel gate, industrial grade, the kind they use at fairgrounds, and a turnstile setup that probably confused the hell out of the guy loading it into my truck. He asked what I needed it for. I just smiled and said, crowd control. Didn't elaborate. Didn't need to. By sunset, I was back at the edge of that trail where it crossed into my land. Tools laid out, generator humming low, and I got to work. Took me a few hours, welding, bolting, setting the posts deep enough that nobody was going to accidentally knock it over. And right above that turnstile, I hung a sign. Big, clean lettering, impossible to ignore. Hawthorne Ridge Walking Path. $10 per person, per entry. Cash only. Private property. No exceptions. I stepped back, looked at it for a second, and yeah, I'll admit it, I smiled. Because it wasn't just a sign, it was a statement. Next morning, I didn't even have to wait long. First wave came in early. Joggers, same folks I saw the day before, earbuds in, stretching like it was just another routine morning. Then they hit the gate, and everything slowed down. You could see it on their faces, that moment where the brain tries to catch up with reality. One woman actually laughed, like she thought it was some kind of joke. Then she looked around, saw the fencing, saw the sign again, and stopped laughing. A guy in a neon running vest stepped up, read it out loud. $10? Are you serious? I was sitting on the tailgate of my truck nearby, sipping coffee, just watching. I shrugged and said, you can read. That didn't go over well. Some of them turned around, muttering under their breath. Others stood there, debating like maybe if they talked long enough the gate would magically open. But here's the thing, a few of them paid. Not happily, but they paid. Because routine is a powerful thing. People will complain all day long, but if something fits into their daily habit, they'll reach for their wallet faster than they'll admit. And once that first person dropped cash into the box I installed beside the turnstile, that was it. The line had been crossed, literally and figuratively. By midday, word had spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. My phone rang twice. Numbers I didn't recognize, didn't bother answering. Then around noon, here comes the cavalry. HOA president rolls up in a shiny SUV, steps out like he's about to deliver a speech to a crowd that isn't there. Mid-50s, crisp polo shirt, Sunglasses too expensive for the attitude he was carrying. He walks straight up to me, doesn't introduce himself, doesn't ask a question, just starts talking. "You can't do this," he says, voice tight, like he's used to people backing down when he raises it. I took a slow sip of coffee, let him finish, then said, "Looks like I just did." That's when it escalated. He starts throwing around words like community access, shared benefit. He even said the trail added value to the surrounding properties, as if that somehow gave him permission to build it on mine. I reached into my truck, pulled out the survey documents, handed them over. "You see those orange markers out there?" I said, pointing down the trail. "Every single one of those sits on my land. Not yours. Not your board's. Mine." He barely glanced at the papers before handing them back, like facts were optional in his world. Then came the threat, lawsuit, injunction, whatever legal buzzwords he thought would scare me. I just nodded, calm as ever, and said, "That's fine. My lawyer's already filed one. Trespass, property damage. You'll get the paperwork soon enough." That's when I saw it, the first crack. Not big, but enough. Because up until that moment, he thought this was a disagreement, a negotiation, something he could talk his way out of. But now he realized this was a problem, a real one. Still, he tried one last angle. "You're inconveniencing an entire community over something that could have been resolved cooperatively." And I'll give him this. That was a smart line. Sounds reasonable. Sounds fair. But it ignores one simple truth. I was never given the chance to cooperate in the first place. So I leaned forward slightly, looked him dead in the eye, and said, "You built first. You ask questions now. That's not cooperation. That's cleanup." He didn't have much to say after that. Left a few minutes later, tires kicking up dust like he was trying to drive off the frustration. And that's when the real pressure started, not on me, on them. Because the residents? Oh, they were not happy. See, it's one thing to promise people a premium amenity. It's another to suddenly put a price tag on it. Complaints started stacking up, emails, calls, probably a few heated board meetings where fingers got pointed and voices got raised. And every single complaint had the same core question: why are we paying for something that was supposed to be included? By the end of the week, they came back. Not with threats this time, with a different tone entirely. More controlled, measured. The HOA president showed up again, this time without the performance. He stood by the gate for a moment before walking over, like he was rehearsing what to say. "What would it take," he asked, "to resolve this?" And there it was. The shift. That moment when control changes hands. I didn't answer right away. Let the silence sit between us for a second. Then I reached into my truck and pulled out a folder. Inside was a lease agreement. Simple, clean, already drafted. I handed it to him. $1,000 a month, I said. Unlimited access for your residents. Miss a payment, gate closes. Permanently. He flipped through the pages, eyes scanning fast, probably calculating how bad things would get if he said no. Because here's the part they didn't plan for. Once you give people something, you can't just take it away without consequences. And I knew that. This is a psychological trap, but this time, they were the ones in it. He asked if the price was negotiable. I shook my head. "You're already getting a discount," I said. "Considering you built the thing for me." That one stung. I could tell. But he didn't argue. Not really. Just stood there for a moment longer, then nodded. "We'll be in touch." 2 days later, the agreement was signed. First check cleared by the end of the week. And just like that, their little shortcut through my land became my most reliable income stream. Now every month, like clockwork, that payment shows up. And every time I drive past that trail, people walking, jogging, pushing strollers like nothing ever happened, I can't help but chuckle a little, because the land didn't change. The rules didn't change. The only thing that changed was who understood them better. Now here's the part people always ask me when they hear this story. Was it worth it? And I usually pause for a second, not because I don't know the answer, but because what they're really asking isn't about the money. It's about the principle. And yeah, the $1,000 a month is nice, don't get me wrong. It shows up on time, no drama, no chasing payments, probably the easiest income I've ever made. But that's not the part that sticks with me. What sticks is how fast something that wasn't theirs almost became theirs, just because nobody questioned it at the start. See, most people think property rights are solid, unshakable, like once your name's on the deed, that's it, end of story. But the truth? It's not that simple. Ownership is one thing, enforcement is another. And if you don't enforce it, well, you'd be surprised how quickly lines start to blur. The lesson here is control doesn't always get taken by force. Sometimes it's taken quietly, through assumptions, convenience, and a little bit of confidence. That HOA didn't show up with bad intentions, at least not in the way people imagine. They didn't think of themselves as trespassers. In their minds, they were improving the area, adding value, making something better. And that right there, that's where things get dangerous. Because when people convince themselves they're doing something good, they stop asking for permission. They stop checking boundaries. And before long, they're standing on someone else's land wondering why there's a gate in front of them. This is a psychological trap, one that shows up way beyond HOAs. You see it in business, in relationships, even in everyday conversations. People test limits, not all at once, but inch by inch. A small assumption here, a skipped step there, until one day, they're so far over the line they don't even remember where it started. And if nobody pushes back, that new reality becomes permanent. From a legal perspective, what saved me wasn't anger or stubbornness. It was timing and documentation. I didn't wait. I didn't see how it plays out. I got the survey done, got everything in writing, made sure there was zero ambiguity about where that boundary stood. Because once something like that drags on, you open the door to complications, claims of ongoing use, arguments about access, all kinds of gray areas that turn a simple problem into a long, expensive fight. According to standard procedure, the moment someone crosses onto your property without permission, you act. Not emotionally, but deliberately. You establish facts. You create a record. You make it clear, early, that this isn't negotiable. And that's something a lot of people struggle with, because confrontation is uncomfortable. It's easier to ignore it, hope it resolves itself, tell yourself it's not a big deal. But small things don't stay small, not when there's value involved. And that trail? That was value. Not just in dollars, but in perception. It made their neighborhood feel more complete, more premium. And once that perception took hold, they were invested. That's why they folded so fast when I put a price on it. Because taking it away would have cost them more than paying for it. The lesson here is leverage doesn't come from yelling the loudest. It comes from understanding what the other side can't afford to lose. And once you see that clearly, you don't need to fight nearly as hard as you think. Now, I'm not saying every situation ends like this. Sometimes people dig in. Sometimes it does turn into a legal war that drags on for years. But even then, the principle stays the same. Know what's yours, know the rules, and don't assume the other side is playing by them just because you are. And maybe the biggest takeaway of all is this. Just because something looks official doesn't mean it's right. A paved path, a printed sign, a polished presentation, it all creates this illusion of legitimacy. But underneath all that, there are still boundaries. Real ones, legal ones. And they don't disappear just because someone decided to ignore them. So if you ever find yourself in a situation where something feels off, where someone's acting a little too confident about something that doesn't quite belong to them, trust that instinct. Look closer. Ask questions. Because the earlier you catch it, the easier it is to deal with. And if you wait too long, you might wake up one day and find a whole walking trail running right through the middle of what used to be yours. Now I'm curious, what would you have done in my place? Would you tear it down? Lawyer up immediately? Or would you have found a way to turn it into something else entirely? Drop your thoughts down below. I read more of those comments than you'd think. And if you enjoy stories like this, the kind that sit right on that line between real life and no way that actually happened, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Because trust me, this ain't the only time someone learned the hard way that boundaries matter.